There we go. He told them to do what? Holy ground. All right. See, everybody see that okay? Okay. If you are reading the word Ezekiel and you're surprised by that, you're in the wrong class. This is day 1 of our quarter on Ezekiel. And I hope everybody came really, really hungry because Ezekiel's a big meal. Let's go ahead and start with a quick word of prayer, and then we will talk a little bit, some introduction and background material on the book of Ezekiel. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for a beautiful day. Thank you so much for our elders and for their wisdom and making provision for us to have these Bible studies. We thank you for the book of Ezekiel and for the great work that prophet did so long ago. We thank you for his witness and his example, for his faith toward you and his love toward his brethren. And we do pray that we'll make good application of what we study today. We appreciate this book. We pray that we will appreciate it more as we continue to study it and understand it more and more. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so book of Ezekiel. Let's have our Bibles open to Ezekiel. And we're going to work through some introductory material. And there's a ton. And the thing is, if you don't know the history, why Ezekiel is where he is, and kind of what Israel and Judah have been up to, without that kind of historical context, I think you end up missing a lot of what happens in this book. Now, let's start off by exploring just a little bit big picture. Why do we find Ezekiel to be such a challenge to study? Because I think if you maybe just did kind of a casual poll of church members, even really knowledgeable Bible-knowing church members, Ezekiel would probably be one of those books in the top 3 for most people of like the book that you just don't really know anything about. And by the way, I'm with you on that. It's probably been, for my entire 20-year life as a preacher, 20 years now, Ezekiel has probably been one of the more weak spots in my Bible knowledge. And now, I'll admit this, and I'll let you think about why is it challenging for you? Why do you suspect it's challenging for others? This is why it's challenging for me. Because I love the history, and so when I read 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which I read them every year, and I love the history of Judah and Israel in the Kings and Chronicles, whenever I get to kind of the end of the Kings and Chronicles, that's Jeremiah's story. Okay, that's Jeremiah. Jeremiah is in Jerusalem, the last days of that city. He's preaching to people while Nebuchadnezzar and his army are outside the city walls. He's preaching to people after the city's been burned to the ground and there's no stone left on top of another stone, and just the remnant, the dregs of society, the leftover people who were not valuable enough as slaves for the Babylonians. And Jeremiah's preaching to those people. So every time I do Kings and Chronicles, I go like, man, you got to read Jeremiah while you're here. And I love Jeremiah. Jeremiah is my favorite of the prophets. So I just like jump in. And so I read Jeremiah, and that's always kind of like sort of satisfies for me. Like, okay, we've brought the story to a close now. Judah's in captivity. Jeremiah's been taken to Egypt against his will. And that sort of kind of brings the story to a close until Nehemiah and Ezra, right? And Ezekiel has always been like, well, I studied Jeremiah, so I don't really need to study Ezekiel. Like, we did Jeremiah, why worry about Ezekiel? Now, that's not a good attitude, I admit. I'm just saying, like, in kind of like, that's the reason why he's always sort of been the neglected prophet for me, because I love Jeremiah so much. And if you've got time to read Jeremiah or Ezekiel, which one are you going to read if one's your favorite? I'm going to read Jeremiah every time. And I love Jeremiah. It's like one of my favorite books in the whole Bible. So poor Ezekiel, he's just kind of like comes after Jeremiah and kind of gets neglected. But that's me. Now, why do you find Ezekiel to be a difficult book? If you do.
Just don't feel like I can read it much.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm waiting for someone to say, because he talks about flying saucers and animals with multiple heads.
I was thinking it was that one.
Yeah, that's why I have a hard time. Yeah, is he talking about flying saucers in this book? Yeah, man, it's like if you don't have a good grasp of Hebrew symbolism, it's just like Revelation. If you don't understand number symbolism and colors, and metallurgy and animals and what they represent, if you don't have a good grasp of that symbolism, man, Ezekiel is going to be really, really hard, and Revelation is going to be really hard, and Daniel is going to be really, really hard. And I'll tell you what, all of it matters, okay? All of it. When in apocalyptic, deeply symbolic literature, when you are clearly reading about symbols, and Ezekiel goes out of his way to say, this animal had this many heads, and this is what the heads were. There's a reason why Ezekiel is pointing that out. There's a reason why one of the heads is an eagle, and one of the heads is a leopard, and one of if it wasn't important, he wouldn't point it out. Just like in Revelation, it's an emerald rainbow, or it was 144,000, or it was a gray horse, right? If it wasn't important in symbolic and apocalyptic literature, almost every detail is impregnated with some kind of symbolic significance. So if you don't have the code for it, if you don't have when you're looking at a map, and at the bottom of the map there's either a key or a legend, right? The little box that has all the symbols in it that say, this symbol means this symbol means that. If you don't have a key or a legend, maps can be kind of hard to know. You don't know what the scale is. You don't know what the symbols represent. So if you're reading through Ezekiel and you just really don't know, why in the world is that animal that? Why is the angel doing this? Yeah, it can feel really inaccessible. So I hope that as we study it, we're going to unlock some of that stuff. We're going to give some of those tools to you, put in your toolbox so that when you read it, I'll tell you what, if you can master Ezekiel, you can go to Revelation and go, oh, man, I get it. Revelation is actually not that hard. If you just kind of get what the symbols are, this whole time I thought it was more hard than it was. So I think that's why we find it a little bit difficult. Another reason, it's big. It's a big book. We studied in our previous quarter, if you were in my class, we studied Amos in 2 weeks. Because Amos is it's 9 chapters. You kind of 4 classes. You can take on Amos in 3 or 4 classes. Obadiah is 1 chapter. Easy. You got Obadiah. The Psalms. Psalms is a big book also, but Psalms is very, it's accessible with bites. You can take the Psalms in bites and go, okay, Psalm 1, that's a bite. Psalm 2, that's a bite. Imprecatory Psalms, that's a big bite, but I can handle that. Ezekiel is you just open it up and it's wow, that's just column after column after column after column after column. And unlike with Jeremiah or Isaiah, there's not very much of Ezekiel that's written in poetic form. Most of our Bibles have poetry. Most of our Bibles have poetry like this, where it's kind of written line by line, stanza by stanza, like poetry. Compare Isaiah. Most of Isaiah is like this. It's poetry, and there's a lot of white space on the page, so it feels a little bit more not quite as intimidating. But Ezekiel is columns, and they're justified on both sides too. So it's thick, straight up columns of information. So it's a big book. Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
I would think when you didn't know Ezekiel when you first started, as soon as you read it, you'll be going home left field, and then you lose interest on. So I really want to go into all this when I don't understand it from the beginning. So that makes it such a hard book.
Yeah, by the time verses 1 through 3 is okay, I've got a person in a real place. He's at the river Chebar. I can handle that. And then he gets into verse 4. It's you are 4 verses in, and we're already talking about flashes of lightning and peals of thunder. And verse 5 is giant living creatures, and they had human form, but they also had wings, and their legs were straight, and their feet were like calves' hooves. So they're not actually that human. I always find that it's always funny, like, they were 4 creatures and they were like humans, but they were really nothing like humans. They were like as much not like, we had this conversation in the car like that, actually yesterday. Sterling, I don't even remember what Sterling was talking about, but Sterling
said giraffes are basically
horses. He was like, giraffes are basically like horses if you think about it. Yeah, except if you change their color and elongate their legs and their necks and their face is different, their digestive systems are different, they live on different continents. But yeah, but so if you change everything about it, then a giraffe is basically like a horse. All right, okay. So yeah, so we get it. Ezekiel's a tough book. It's a big, thick book. It's very difficult. But that's okay. That's okay. Some of the most satisfying things that we can do in life, whether it's a hobby or a career path or educational goals, sometimes the most satisfying things that we do in life are the hardest things that we do. Tackling that proverbial marathon, that thing in your life that's just like so daunting, like, I don't know if I can do this. And then you just kind of do it step by step, bite by bite. And then you finish it and you go, I did it. Wow, I did it. Anybody who's run a marathon, they finish it and they go, that was the worst experience in my life. I'm going to sign up for another one.
Like you.
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. Oh, yeah, childbirth. Yeah.
That was terrible. I want another.
All right. Let's go through some basic stuff. And if any of this looks familiar, a couple of years ago, we did a class in the auditorium where we went through Old Testament geography, and I drew from a lot of that. So if some of these charts look familiar, I'm just telling you, we've gone through it before, but it's been 2.5 years. Well, it was 2020 when we did that. So yes, it's been 3 years now since we've done that. So I thought it'd be good to just go through some background. Let's put Ezekiel in his context. So a chronology of the prophets, okay? And you get all the way down to, you find Ezekiel is very much near the end, okay? And when you line up Ezekiel with the King's chronology, you'll see why. Contemporaries with Ezekiel, you'll find that Jeremiah overlaps quite a bit with Ezekiel. Habakkuk overlaps quite a bit with, I was getting mixed with Daniel there. But Jeremiah and Ezekiel overlap with each other. And the interplay between what Jeremiah says and what Ezekiel says is really important. Jeremiah is a prophet of the remnant left behind after Nebuchadnezzar destroys Jerusalem. Ezekiel is the prophet of the people who were taken away. And so they coincide with each other, but they preach to completely different audiences. Jeremiah is talking to a dejected and broken people, and they have seen their kings taken away in chattel. They have seen their neighbors, every wealthy person, every valuable person, everybody with a skill or a talent, or people who can read or know math, or anybody who's good looking, or like Nebuchadnezzar basically went through Judah and said, anybody that I think I could use in Babylon, you're coming with me. Come on. Daniel, his 3 friends, Azariah, Mishael, like he took anybody that was like useful, people who read, people who had talents, craftsmen, business people, are all gone. So when you take away all of the people like that, what are you left with in Jerusalem? Just, like poor people and homeless people and people with leprosy, and like you're just sort of left with the unfortunate leftovers of society, the forgotten people of society, they were not even worth being slaves. That's how worthless they were. They were not even worth the Babylonians taking them away as slaves. That is who Jeremiah is prophesying to. And his whole ministry was about, guys, just accept that this is our lot. Be obedient to the Babylonians and you'll survive. Just do what the Babylonians say, and they'll leave us alone. And we can be here in our land, in Judah, and we can build our homes again. And if you just do what the Babylonians say, God will take care of us. Everything will be okay. I don't want to do what the Babylonians say. Do what the Babylonians say. No, I'm not going to do that. And Ezekiel, on the other hand, he's taken away. I believe in the second wave of captives. There's 3 waves of captives that Nebuchadnezzar takes between 605 and 587. And I believe he was in the second wave of captives that were taken. So he's taken away. His audience is very different from Jeremiah. Ezekiel is actually prophesying to people whose lives aren't that bad. They get taken to Babylon, and most of them, like I said, they're craftsmen, and they're people who read and write, and they have skills and abilities, and they have some like political positions. And so for them, they're put in Babylon as a displaced people, but they're basically told, like, well, this is your home now. There's a canal right over here. You can plant vineyards and you can build farms and houses. And, guys, just obey the law, be good, do what the Babylonians say. And life's not half bad. Life wasn't bad for Nehemiah. Life wasn't bad for Daniel. I mean, in a material sense, be living. So Ezekiel is actually prophesying to people who had homes and businesses, and they started building synagogues and having places of worship, and like they were living really relatively nice lives, while their brethren in Judah were just abject poverty and misery. So it's very, very different audience that he's talking to. All right, some tips for studying prophets. This is just big picture, and this chart kind of lays out like where did some of these prophets go. You have the northern tribes. You have guys like Elijah and Elisha primarily were preaching to Israel. You have Obadiah is the shortest Old Testament book, and man, he just hammers the Edomites like crazy in that book. Prophets of Judah, primarily Isaiah, Jeremiah, Zephaniah, Micah. Those guys are prophesying just that southern tribes. Post-exile Judah, Haggai and Zechariah. Those were the two prophets who encouraged the people who came back to Judah to refocus and build the temple. Like they were the ones like, guys, you can't just build your own nice houses and then ignore the house of God. Let's get back to work, guys. Let's rebuild the temple. Let's finish this job. So they were prophesying mostly to post-exile Judah. And up in Babylon, Habakkuk, Ezekiel, Daniel, these were guys who were in Babylon prophesying to them. And of course, famously, where did Jonah go? Well, Jonah went to Assyria and Nineveh. Some tips. We'll go ahead and skip this one because, we really don't want to broaden too much. But I will say mostly this third tip, as we go through Ezekiel, let's keep an eye out for words and phrases that seem to be repeated a lot, especially repeated in other places. You're going to start seeing a lot of patterns. There are motifs. What does the word motif mean? If you weren't an English major, that's okay. But what is a motif? A theme that you see kind of running throughout a piece of literature. Whether it's seeing motifs of dualism in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or different visual motifs in The Wizard of Oz. Motifs are themes or images or symbols that you see that kind of like are woven through a piece of literature. There are a lot of motifs in the prophets, whether it's motifs of nature, cultivated things, vineyards, fig trees, olive trees, farms, like those sorts of things. You're going to see a lot of those motifs. So just kind of like, let's just be really aware of when we're looking through Ezekiel. Like, if you go like, a couple weeks ago in that previous chapter, he actually used like the same kind of word or used the same image. That's often very intentional. Chronology of the kings. Okay, we got to understand where we are in our history here. So, Assyrian captivity. Israel gets taken away. They're not really part of our story in Ezekiel because it was before that. Assyria comes and they conquer the northern tribes and they take them away, and that's that. The southern tribes are spared. Okay, the story of Hezekiah. Assyria and Sennacherib come with hundreds of thousands of Assyrians. They descend upon Jerusalem. They've destroyed Lachish and all these other towns, and God delivers them because of Hezekiah's faith and trust. And so Judah, the southern tribes, they are left behind. No pun intended. and they continue to exist as a kingdom for a while. And they have kind of a mixed bag of good kings and bad kings. Manasseh was a horrible king, although he did repent near the end of his life. Josiah, really good king. Probably the best king they had since David, and the best king they had after David. Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, you start getting now, after Josiah dies, and how does he die, by the way? Where does Josiah die? Good king, ignoble end. Where does he die? He dies fighting the Egyptians, actually. Yeah. So Josiah kind of sticks his nose in international affairs that are way beyond his pay grade. At this time, I think it's on the next map here. Yeah. So the Assyrian Empire, or properly in historical terms, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, was a massive empire that dominated the Medes, the Babylonians, the Persians, and also dominated Egypt. They dominated the Levant as well. And the Babylonians kind of rise up. Of course, that's Nineveh. The Babylonians, along with the Medes, kind of form an alliance within the Assyrian Empire. They're like, we're kind of sick and tired of these Assyrians. I'm really tired of these guys. Always getting, telling us what to do. And so the Babylonians rebel against the Assyrians. They even go attack Nineveh and take the capital of Nineveh. Well, what was left of the Assyrians, their army, heads west. The Egyptians send a message and say, okay, Assyria, I know we've not liked each other for a long time. We have hated each other, we've fought with each other, but neither of us like the Babylonians. Because you know what the Egyptians and the Assyrians both recognized? If we don't stop the Babylonians are going to conquer all of us. So in a rather historically significant moment, the Egyptians and the Assyrians actually joined forces, which they'd never done before. They always hated each other. Because they were always, it was Assyria and Egypt. It was the two heavyweights, okay? And they were always boxing at each other. Well, for the first time ever, they realized there's a boxer in the ring who's stronger than both of them. So their plan is to meet in Carchemish, and they're going to duke it out with Babylon for supremacy. And if they can deal with Babylon, then the status quo might be restored. The Bronze Age status quo might be restored. Now, while Egypt is on their way, Pharaoh Necho of Egypt is on his way to Carchemish for this great big battle. On the way, Josiah, this little client king in Judah, sticks his nose in international affairs. Like I said, way beyond his pay grade. We're talking about the Soviet Union and the U.S. during the height of the Cold War, and Slovenia says, I think I should have a say in this. Like Latvia, Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein says, well, no one ever asked me my opinion. So Josiah sticks his nose in, and he actually tries to stop Pharaoh Necho of Egypt. He says, you're not going any further. Nobody goes through Judah without having to go through me. And the reason is that Josiah thought that if the Babylonians took over, and if he was helpful to them, then the Babylonians might be really, really nice to him. So his whole deal was, I'm on the side of the Babylonians. I'm kind of putting all my chips on the Babylonians. And if I can get good with the Babylonians, maybe the Babylonians will give me a fair shake when all this, when the dust settles finally. So Josiah tries to fight it in Egypt. The Pharaoh basically says, why didn't you go back to your little kingdom and just leave us all alone? Okay, because we got bigger fish to fry than you. And Josiah refuses, and they get into a tussle, and Josiah ends up dying in battle, which is unfortunate because the last good king of Judah dies in a really, really unfortunate way. Never should have happened. He should have minded his own business and let these big affairs take care of themselves, and he ends up dying in battle. So, going back a couple slides now. That's Josiah's end. Now, he leaves behind his son, Jehoahaz, and he's the first of 3 of Josiah's sons that end up ruling in Jerusalem. And all of them have bad ends. All of them come to trouble. Jehoahaz is actually taken away by the Egyptians and replaced with Jehoiakim. Okay? Jehoiakim. The Egyptians basically put Jehoiakim down as he's going to be our guy. He's going to be our planted king. We think we can control him a little bit better. He ends up not being very helpful to them, and they kill him. And he gets replaced by Jehoiachin, who's also called Coniah or Jeconiah, depending on which verse you're looking at. But Jehoiachin, Jeconiah, and Coniah are all the same king. He ends up causing trouble to the Babylonians, and the Babylonians say, "You're out of here!" And they replace him with his uncle, Zedekiah, who they think, well, maybe he's a guy we can control. So basically, you just have a series of kings that are either the Egyptians or the Babylonians, viewing them as just puppet kings that we think we can kind of manipulate and control. And all of them prove to be really useless to their masters and are taken away. The only one, Jeconiah is taken away by the Babylonians, and he's actually given kind of a cushy spot in Babylon. They take him away as a prisoner, but they sort of treat him really nice. And Nebuchadnezzar's son, who takes over after he dies, actually raises up Jeconiah to a really stately position and lets him eat at his table from then on. That's a story for another day. Okay. So, fall of Assyria, Babylon takes over, and who's the head honcho in Babylon? Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar begins reigning in 605 after the Battle of Carchemish, which is a huge battle. Excuse me. The Babylonians defeat the Assyrians and the Egyptians straight up. It's a huge success. Nebuchadnezzar is the general in charge of the army, and he is the son of what's his father's name? Uh-oh. Yeah, I'm not remembering his father's name. That's bothering me. Nabopolassar. That's it right there. That's Nebuchadnezzar's dad, okay? Nebuchadnezzar is his son and the general of his army, and he's actually there at Carchemish and leads the army in this defeat of Assyria and Egypt. And his father dies that same year that Carchemish happened. So he pretty much cleans the floor with Egypt and Assyria. His dad dies back at home, and he heads back home to take over as king in a relatively peaceful manner. Like, there's not any upheaval. Everybody's ready for him to be king. He's served well in the army. He's led them to victory. And he comes back the conquering hero and the triumphant son of the recently deceased king. Nebuchadnezzar is a super interesting character because he's one of those people in the Bible where you have a ton of like secular history that lines up with the Bible. And so he's I kind of view Nebuchadnezzar as a waypoint of sorts. Like, he sort of like anchors the Bible in reality, which I appreciate as a student of history and as a defender of the Bible as an accurate text. It's nice to have these people like Nebuchadnezzar who are like, dude, this was a real guy, and there is verifiable, solid, put your hands on it in a museum kind of reality about Nebuchadnezzar, as well as other people like Cyrus and Darius the Mede and other people, as well as Sennacherib of Assyria. These are real people, and I appreciate the way that it was anchored in history. Nebuchadnezzar, you learn a lot about him in the book of Daniel. So Babylonian Empire, big empire, takes over the whole thing. Egypt is more like a client state. They're relatively independent from Babylon, and they do cause some problems for Babylon a little bit later. Another story for another time. Destruction of Jerusalem. There are 3 waves of captives that are taken from Judah. The first is in 605, which probably included Daniel and his 3 friends who come to be known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So that's 605. Daniel goes. He's in Babylon. They serve as their servants in the imperial household, probably eunuchs, The next one is in 597. We mentioned Jehoiachin. He becomes king, but he's deposed by Babylon after a second attack on the city. Another wave of captives is taken. and Zedekiah is placed as king. That's Jehoiachin's uncle, by the way, the last of Josiah's 3 sons who reigned, the youngest of his sons. Jeremiah is left behind to prophesy to the people, while Ezekiel prophesies to those who are taken. The last of the waves of captives is in 586. Zedekiah rebels against Nebuchadnezzar and tries to go to Egypt and say, "Hey, Egypt, let's rise up against Babylon. I think we can do it." Jeremiah, the whole thing that Jeremiah says is, you can't do it. It's a stupid idea. Don't do that. Zedekiah doesn't listen, and the city of Jerusalem is destroyed once and for all. Jeremiah survives by the skin of his teeth, along with his amanuensis, who you read about quite a bit, his scribe. They survive, barely, and Nebuzaradan, the captain of Nebuchadnezzar's army, basically tells Jeremiah, "I don't care where you go. Stay here, go to Egypt, I don't care. You're free to go." So that's kind of Jeremiah's story. A governor is left behind named Gedaliah, and Gedaliah is actually a really, really good guy, but he's super naive, and he lets an assassin into his life, this guy named Ishmael, and Ishmael thinks he's going to lead a revolution against the Babylonians. It blows up in his face, and he, along with the rest of the remnant, take Jeremiah against his will to Egypt, where Jeremiah probably ends up dying. Whereas Ezekiel lives a relatively comfortable and stable life by the river Chebar. So Ezekiel at the river Chebar. Older biblical commentaries identify the Chebar with the Kabu River in what is now modern-day Syria. The Kabur is mentioned in 1 Chronicles chapter 5 as the Habor, probably the same river. However, some recent scholarship has agreed that the location of the Chebar Canal is near Nippur in Iraq. The Kabaru waterway in ancient Akkadian is mentioned among some 5th century archives. It was part of a complex irrigation and transportation system, which also included the Shat El Nil, which is a silted up canal that you can still go to today toward the east of Babylon. And not to be confused with the Kibar River in Iran, site of Kibar Dam, the oldest surviving arch dam in the world. There you go. If you're curious about that. So basically, when he opens his book and says he was by the river Chebar in chapter 1, verse 1, what he's saying is we're in a community of Jews, of captive Jews, and we have been placed as captive Jews by this canal, the Chebar Canal. It was part of a canal system that was able to irrigate the land. And they were put there just to be farmers. Like, okay, here you are. This is your new home. There's the canal over there. Here's some tools. Go build yourself some houses and have a farm. Have a good life, I guess. We'll be over here if you need us. And the Jews were just left alone to basically live life. And that was what Jeremiah told them. Jeremiah sent a letter to the captives. Jeremiah said, your captivity is going to be 70 years long. We all know the 70 years of Jeremiah. Daniel discovers it, and that's how Daniel's able to kind of put 2 and 2 together. But Jeremiah's letter to the captives is, you're going to be there for 70 years, build houses, get married, have kids, just have a life. Get comfortable. You're going to be there for a while. So get comfortable. Okay, so that's where Ezekiel is. As far as some ruins of Babylon, just kind of plant you in real life. This is what's considered the ruins of the North Palace in the city of Babylon. This was laid down by Nebuchadnezzar, so this was the foundation of his palace. Still, there it is. Go see it today. I mean, if you feel like going to Iraq for vacation, you can go see it. Not really lining up to spend some time in Iraq. This is what Babylon looked like in its heyday. This is the famous Ishtar Gate. It was commissioned by Nebuchadnezzar and covered in blue glazed tiles. You can actually see the Ishtar Gate in a museum in Germany today, which is really, really cool, actually. Again, if you have the money to go on vacation in Germany. And the site was excavated in 1904, and it was using some connections in German intelligence to where the archaeologist was able to smuggle this gate piece by piece out of Iraq and then painstakingly reconstructed in the museum in Germany. So that's what the Ishtar Gate, that just gives you like a sample, like this is the gate. This was just the front door of the city of Babylon. It's kind of hard to imagine. If this is just the front door, what would the rest of the city look like? What level of luxury and opulence, architectural wonders and engineering masterpieces might they have had in this city in its glorious heyday? Incidentally, Saddam Hussein felt like rebuilding the city of Jerusalem in the 1980s. In the height of Saddam Hussein's power, he kind of had this madman's idea of, I'm the modern day Nebuchadnezzar. Like Saddam Hussein seriously thought that he was basically Nebuchadnezzar reincarnated. Not literally reincarnated, but he believed and styled himself as the second coming of Nebuchadnezzar. So he said about rebuilding the city of Babylon brick by brick, piece by piece. It came to be criticized as the Disneyland for dictators. He leveled entire villages and irreparably destroyed archaeological sites just to put his vanity on display. These stones actually have, in Aramaic, the initials of Saddam Hussein's name engraved on all of these stones. Just to kind of show like the level of like arrogance that that Saddam Hussein had. That's just another view of it. Now he didn't finish building it because Saddam Hussein got a big fat head and decided that he wanted Kuwait, and that was that. But you can see how much progress he made on it, and it gives you a sample. It gives you a sample of this is kind of what Babylon would have looked like in some form back in that time period when Nebuchadnezzar was around. This was the Babylonian palace that Saddam Hussein built for himself, and it was actually used by U.S. forces in 2003 as a headquarters. And you can still go there again if you go to Iraq. And the interior walls are still covered with graffiti by American troops. So anyway, that's your background information. I hope that you found that interesting. I don't know if we went through that too quickly or not quickly enough. I've done all the talking so far. So, thoughts? Kurt?
So, I like to put stuff on a time frame.
Yeah.
We pretty much get that in verse 3, the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity when he was taken out.
Yeah.
So are we talking around 590 to 597 BC here?
So, let me pull up my timeline again, okay? Oops. Let me pull up my timeline because I think it's really important here. So if in the 5th year of Jehoiachin's exile, that would have been the 5th out of 11 years of Zedekiah. Zedekiah ruled for 11 years, okay? And he would have ruled...
into his term.
Yeah, so it would have been the 5th year of Zedekiah ruling. So that makes us... we got the math on that. So it would have been about 592, 593. Yeah, 592, 593, give or take. I actually have a note in a handwritten note that says 593 BC is probably when it was written, but kind of in that 593, 592 range, that date range. So yeah, good question. What are the thoughts? Like, okay, big picture here. What's the value of knowing all this background information? I know I threw a bunch of historical junk at you. Maybe you cared. Maybe it was interesting. Maybe it totally bored you to death. I don't know. But what's the value in knowing, like, if you're going to study Ezekiel, why is it important to know where are we, when are we, what in the world is going on?
You know who he's talking to.
Okay, you know who he's talking to. Yeah. You know why he's talking to them. I mean, it's like if you don't know that Ezekiel is talking to people who are in Babylon, who've been there for 10 years now, and who are kind of living an okay life, like that knowledge colors your understanding of what Ezekiel's going to be talking about.
But he is punishing Israel here.
Yeah.
In the first 2 dozen chapters or so, it's punishment against Israel before he gets in punishment against the nations, and then getting into the blessings.
Yeah.
Down the road.
And that's chapter 3. I think what you're saying, chapter 3 in verse 4, Son of man, go to the house of Israel. I think broadly speaking, Israel as in kind of symbolic. I know he's talking to people from Judah, not from the northern, but he's using Israel in its deepest historical sense. The people of Israel. Go to Israel, speak with my words to them. You're not being sent to a people of unintelligible speech or difficult language. You're going to the house of Israel, nor to many peoples of unintelligible speech or difficult language whose words you can't understand. But I've sent you to them who should listen to you. Yet the house of Israel will not be willing to listen to you, since they're never willing to listen to me. Surely the whole house of Israel is stubborn and obstinate. That's kind of your summation of what did Ezekiel face. These are people, like I said, it's their fate, and they've accepted it. I'm gone. I'm a captive. I'm living in Babylon. But just looking around, there's palm trees and a nice canal and arable land. And the Babylonians are not like the Assyrians. Like, let's be clear. What were the Assyrians like as captors? Brutal. I mean, like, skin you alive and put you out as a garden ornament. Brutal. Like, they called it flaying. They flay you, they skin you, and then they take your muscles apart one at a time. Yes. Alive. So, the Babylonians were not like that. And Nebuchadnezzar was not, he was a despot, to be sure. Like, Nebuchadnezzar was no humanitarian. Like, he was certainly a dictator of a world-conquering dictator. But, like, all things considered, compared to, Tiglath-Pileser or Sennacherib or some of the pharaohs, like, he was a relatively ethical, thoughtful, deliberate, organized, stable leader over a stable, relatively like law-abiding. Like, Babylon was interested in, hey, let's get the commerce going. We have laws. Listen, we just want to go about our business. We want to take over the world, but we want to go about our business and have nice roads and build nice houses and have an economy. And they weren't really interested in just like burning people at the stake and piling up their skulls. That was. Look at the picture that we put up of the Ishtar Gate in Babylon. They didn't want piles of skulls. It's not nice looking. They wanted a pretty place to live. So all things considered, Ezekiel is going to be prophesying and preaching to a people who are like, it's not that bad. And they're going to get comfortable. And they're not really going to want to go home. And at the end of 70 years, I know that 40,000 people ended up going back, with these waves of returnees from Babylon back to Jerusalem. But let's be real, 40,000 out of the total number of Jews who lived in Babylon is a really, really small minority. Most Jews, when Cyrus said, "You're free to go home," most of the Jews in Babylon said, "Yeah, I don't think so. I can stay here where I've got a really, really nice life, or I can go to like a completely devastated Jerusalem where there's not even walls around the city." I don't think so. Most Jews stayed in Babylon. And that's tough. That's tough. In fact, even by the time of Jesus, even in the first century, there was a huge population of Jews that lived in the area around Babylon, even in the time of the first century, to where I don't know, I don't have the figure right in front of me literally, but I think that the population of Jews living in the region of Babylon was more than the population of Jews living in the province of Judea. And I think there were more Jews living in Egypt than there were living in the province of Judea, because they found good lives, comfortable lives. So that makes a difference. Ezekiel's trying to motivate people, give people hope, like trying to see the big picture and see like, okay, we're waiting for something. We don't get so comfortable that you forget that there's still something, there's something out there that we need to be striving for. Okay, I've got homework for you, and then we'll go ahead and we'll let out a minute early here because I've gone through all my material. I would really like you to go to the Bible Project, and you can either go to Bible Project, their website, just Google the Bible Project, or you go to YouTube and go to their YouTube channel, and I'd like you to watch the short video that they have on the summary of Ezekiel, okay? Now, I don't do that because I want to be clear here. I'm not endorsing everything that the Bible Project puts out in their material. Like, so all of that, so we're very clear here. But what I love about, if you've never heard of them, they're a group of scholars, Bible scholars, who create short, straightforward video material on every book of the Bible. So if you want to know what Ezekiel is about and you've got like 8 minutes to sit and watch a video, or 5 minutes, or however long it is, they will say, here's Ezekiel. This is the structure of the book. This is where the book is going. Here's the main themes. And it's done in kind of an artistic, like really logical sort of way, visual way. So please go to the Bible Project and watch their summation of Ezekiel. I think it's actually a two-parter. I think there's 2 videos on it. So just to be clear, just so that we can come into class next time ready to go, like, okay, I might not know much about Ezekiel, but I know the big picture. I know the 5-minute version of it. Carrie, can I add something there?
I was just going to say that it's a two-parter because the first one only goes like half the book.
Yeah, it's a two-parter, yeah. So the Bible Project, they have a YouTube channel or they have their own website. And again, visually, super easy way to kind of wrap your head around a whole big book of the Bible. So that's your homework if you don't mind doing that. And we'll get together on Wednesday and keep going with that.